Hey guys, Jake Borucki here with my personal MCU rankings video. I'm going to be going through from 30 down to 1, and I'll give you all my reasons why I'm ranking things. I recently actually just completed a rewatch, actually this morning, of every single MCU film except for a second watch of Eternals. I'm probably going to wait to watch that a second time when it arrives on Disney Plus, probably by the end of the year. So yeah, I'll be dividing it up into tiers. So the D tier is the least favorites. These are movies that, unless I'm doing a full rewatch like I just completed, I probably won't go back to rewatch. I tune out a lot to some of the movies, or there's just things that aren't as interesting, or maybe it's too overstuffed. Whatever the case may be, they're not the worst films ever made, but they're not films in the MCU I will regularly go back to rewatch. And if people want to know where to start to get them into the MCU, these are movies that I would not recommend. Then we've got, to start, then C tier, we've got meh. They're not as horrible, or not as bad as the movies I have below them, but there's still quite a few issues that I have with them, and they're just kind of meh, but I still enjoy a few more things in the C tier stuff. B tier is good. There's flaws for sure, but it's still enjoyable. They're movies that I might rewatch sometimes. There's more stuff I can appreciate about them, but I'll still have a couple things where it's like, didn't quite hit the mark with these shows or movies. A tier, they're great. Maybe there's a couple nitpicks I can point out, and I think you could do that with all these. They didn't quite become the best of the best for a couple minor reasons, but overall they were really fun to go through as I was watching them, or as we were doing the podcast on Tribe of Nerds. And then S tier for me is just everything. It just hit all the right marks for me personally. You could say a couple things might be clunky in the movie or the show. Some things maybe didn't work for you. For me, most of the things in the S tier movies just hit right for me. Of course, my rankings are not the right list of rankings. You can disagree. You can post your own of all 30 MCU projects. And so without further ado, let's get started with the D tier. Number 30, my least favorite MCU film, Thor: The Dark World. My issue with Thor: The Dark World is it's just a very bland, boring movie. And there's just not a lot of intrigue there. I don't think a lot of the actors really enjoyed themselves. If you read the behind the scenes from this movie, Hemsworth wasn't really feeling great as Thor in this movie. I mean, Natalie Portman literally left the MCU for a time because of the disagreements, because originally Patty Jenkins was supposed to direct this movie, who directed the two Wonder Womans, and she had a disagreement with Disney at the time, and Natalie Portman liked Patty Jenkins, so she's like, hey, I'm gonna dip out because I don't like this, and evidently they're able to pull her back in. I've never liked the Jane Foster-Thor relationship as much. I don't think I didn't think Hemsworth or Natalie Portman did a bad job. I don't think the writing was as great. I think Tom Hiddleston as Loki is having a grand time and he really, with what he does as Loki, and I think he's the main reason this propels the movie. Malekith is a terrible villain. He's literally like a cardboard cutout, basically. All you know about him is he wants the Aether, the Reality Stone. You don't know anything else, what motivations he has. So I just can't, it's so hard for me to enjoy this movie. I can enjoy some things with I can enjoy Loki. Tom Hiddleston's, again, just great. The funeral for Frigga, their mom, is good as well. I just am not invested in these characters. Also, you have Darcy has a pointless intern. Like, literally, he's a pointless character. I don't know why he was in the movie. It's just hard to like this movie. So, number 29 is still in the D tier. Incredible Hulk. There's some good things that they had in there, and I don't hate Edward Norton as Bruce Banner. I prefer Mark Ruffalo, of course, but obviously Edward Norton left the MCU because of, he was very hard to work with, infamously, and he just wasn't a team player, so they replaced him with Mark Ruffalo, who is more of a team player. I didn't get invested in the characters as much, though. I mean, Bruce Banner a little bit, just like him and Betty Ross. Like, Liv Tyler's not very interesting. Pretty one note there. I say the most interesting character in this movie is honestly William Hurt as Thunderbolt Ross, and that's weird to say because he's just an unlikable character in this movie, but he's still interesting. And of course, Thunderbolt Ross coming back. They talk about the Super Soldier Serum. Abomination just came back in Shang-Chi. And is coming back for She-Hulk. So, I mean, there's things that are coming back in, and I'd say this starts off Bruce Banner's arc in the MCU, at least through to Endgame. It's kind of the oddball outcast of the MCU, but there's still stuff that they take from this movie moving forward. It hasn't been referenced as much, at least definitely not in the Infinity Saga, except for a few lines, and of course, like the story arc, as I mentioned. Now they're finally doing more with it. And of course, Tony Stark appears in the post-credit scene to talk to Ross, so that might be the best part of the movie, to be honest. Alright, 28, Iron Man 2, and this is disappointing to put an Iron Man movie as low as this, but just like there's some cool things they did in this movie. I mean, they introduced Black Widow in this movie. You're getting Don Cheadle now as War Machine. They originally cast Terrence Howard, of course, in the first Iron Man, and then they replaced him with Don Cheadle moving forward. Of course, I still prefer Don Cheadle, but it was just a mess of plot lines. Yes, they have to get ready for the Avengers coming up. It's setting up for that very, very clearly. I just don't think everything they were trying to set up and like all the plot lines they were juggling, I don't think it worked as well. Whiplash is also not as interesting as he could have been with Mickey Rourke, although he does want his bird. And I mean, Justin Hammer's a pathetic idiot, but Sam Rockwell really plays the part and has fun with it. So I can't say that Justin Hammer is my personal least favorite. People on the podcast definitely disagreed, and unfortunately on the Tribe of Nerds, he is the lowest ranked MCU villain. I think he's better than Malekith personally, just based on entertainment value, and I feel like you get more out of Justin Hammer than you ever got from Malekith. So yeah, I just Iron Man 2, it's disappointing. But that's just how it goes. 27, I have the first Thor. I think that there's some good performances here. I think you start seeing this Thor and Loki relationship, of course. Also, they created Asgard. Like, that was not an easy task to do. Thor could have flopped. Again, like, it's a hard thing to sell, this, like, mystical city in space, and they were able to do it at least to the extent that it was successful. Anthony Hopkins as Odin is also great, particularly in the beginning of the film, right before he banishes Thor. Obviously, then he goes into the Odin sleep for most of the rest of the movie, and you get to see, like, start getting to know who Loki is as a character. He's trying to find his purpose. But, like, the Dutch angles, like, They had so many Dutch angles, like the camera's just tilted for shots for seemingly no reason. I don't really get that. The Frost Giants, just, I don't know. It just was kind of like, there's some funny fish out of water comedy in this movie. Kenneth Branagh's still great, and he did bring the Shakespearean stuff to it, which I understand what they were going for. It's just not particularly interesting or exciting. And again, I feel like the first two Thor movies really, they missed the mark a little bit. And obviously, you know, Ragnarok is going to go much higher on this list because I feel like they were able to land on what they wanted with that movie, with Thor. All right, so that's the end of the D tier. So that's the bottom 4. C tier now. This is the meh movies or shows in the MCU. Number 26, Captain Marvel. So originally, I had kind of put this in the D tier, but I do remember there are a couple things I do at least like a little more than stuff in my D tier. I do think Carol Danvers is not as well written as she could have been, but I think Brie Larson is the right choice to be Carol Danvers, despite the controversies and people just hating on her. But like, there's some cool things, like I think Samuel Jackson throughout as Nick Fury, as a younger Nick Fury who's learning all this stuff for the first time, is really, really cool. We get to see a little bit from Coulson. Goose the Cat is awesome, or Flurkin. I also really love Ben Mendelsohn as Talos. I like the Skrulls, how they did them in this movie. Unfortunately, you also get things like, I think Jan Rog, Jude Law is a great actor, but they really made him extremely boring in this movie, and yeah, that... and then Ronan the Accuser showing up, he really does nothing either. I mean, they didn't even need to have him in there, but I thought the Skrull twist was good. Nick Fury, up until he gets his eye scratched out by Goose, works for me. I think that was a horrible decision, but again, there's bad writing choices I'm hoping that they can improve in the sequel. They obviously went with a different director and writing team, and I think that's a good choice. Hopefully they can really improve on what the first one couldn't really accomplish. But I think I enjoy Captain Marvel a bit more for those couple things than stuff in my D tier. Number 25, What If Season 1. So What If being the MCU's first foray into animation. I think the animation was fine. It fit a comic book type thing. Unfortunately, they made every single episode only 30 minutes, and they crushed all these stories down into a half hour, gave us really not enough time to get to know these new characters before they just moved on, and then felt that they needed to have this big crossover event for the finale. And I just don't think I don't think we needed this Guardians of the Multiverse or Multiversal Avengers team at the end to fight this Ultron, who had been seen chomping a galaxy in the penultimate episode. Then the finale, he's just beaten by this team that I don't even think is the best that could have been assembled. Good news, good things about this show. I think Jeffrey Wright is great as Uatu the Watcher. His voice is perfect. I think that's enough to bring it out of the D tier. I think it's fine. There's episodes, I think the Zombies episode was great. Obviously, that's spinning off into the Zombies series, which, you know, I wanted to see more, but then I don't know if I want an entire series based on Marvel Zombies. And I liked the Chadwick Boseman episode, but I feel also... like, I liked it for the fact that it's memorializing Chadwick and paying him respects. You know, if Chadwick Boseman had not passed away, I don't think this episode would have been as revered, simply because of the fact that also characters in the episode specifically, and some of the other episodes, like the Party Thor episode, were so over the top. Like, the humor is so over the top, and... like, I don't think Korath the Pursuer, Jaimin Hansu's character, is going to go over the top, like, just goofy. I just don't... things just didn't work in that way. But I like the episode because we get to hear Chadwick one more time, and we get to hear him throughout this series. There's just things that didn't work, unfortunately. And season 2 is coming. The Marvel Zombies is coming. Other animated shows are coming now in the MCU. So we'll just see how they can improve. And maybe season 2 will be better. Also, the Gamora, unfortunately, they couldn't finish that episode with Gamora and Tony Stark on Sakaar. Then she's in the finale, and it's like, okay, we didn't get to know this character at all. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic. But yeah, that's my thinking on What If. 24, Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3, so I like the action in this movie, and I love the finale with all the Iron Man suits. Like, that is awesome, and I think this does do really well with Tony Stark's character. Infamously on the podcast, I think I gave this a 5 when we were doing our numbered rankings 1 to 6, and I don't really agree with that. Thinking back, I'd probably give this around a 4, maybe a little less. I think the villain Aldrich Killian is not very good. As Will pointed out, he's a bit of a Mark Wahlberg wannabe, Guy Pearce, and it's just a poor man's syndrome, really, from The Incredibles. I mean, he's just not that interesting, and that's that same type of storyline, but in the MCU. Trevor Slattery, obviously we just saw Ben Kingsley back as Trevor in Shang-Chi, and that was fantastic. Obviously at the time people are pissed on the Mandarin twist. Now seeing the real Mandarin finally in Shang-Chi, I think that payoff finally came, and I enjoyed that. But I understand at the time the frustration of this famous Iron Man foe adversary, people getting upset that didn't pay off very well, and it was just turned into a joke. But I think Trevor going into Shang-Chi, I think is fantastic and hilarious, and it's Ben Kingsley, so that was cool. And the one-shot All Hail the King, which I'll put as part of Iron Man 3, I also think that's a fantastic one-shot that has Justin Hammer cameo and shows Trevor getting captured by the Ten Rings for using the Mandarin name. So that's the end of the C tier. I moved some stuff up, and moved some stuff around. So that's the end of the C tier. B tier, good. This is stuff I've rewatched. This is stuff I can enjoy, and this is stuff, like, some of this stuff I just feel like people can get into some of these movies more than the other stuff or shows if they start with some of these, and that was kind of my rationale for a couple of these. Otherwise, there's just some good things, but there's still quite a few flaws, and I can understand maybe people that don't like these as much. I think some of these can be divisive, of course. Number 23, Black Widow. So Black Widow went down for me on the rewatch. I think thematically it really, really fits as a Black Widow movie. I just wish it came out sooner. I'm going to agree with that. Unfortunately, they had to get Ike Perlmutter out of the picture in order to actually have these solo films with, women leads specifically. And unfortunately, we finally get Black Widow a little too late. But there are some good things in this film. Yelena Florence Pugh is great, and I'm excited to see her in Hawkeye, looks like. So that's going to be exciting. And I was really excited for David Harbour to join because of Stranger Things. But I looking back, and after that podcast that we did, JJ, Will, Kim, and I do understand that the Red Guardian is just a really big buffoon, narcissistic buffoon, and that just doesn't really work in this because he just doesn't do anything of value as a character. But I love David Harbour, so I'm willing to give it a bit of a pass here because I think having David Harbour be in the MCU is awesome. And I think the spy like type of thing, like obviously it thematically fits, and the Smells Like Teen Spirit cover that they do at the beginning, that montage is really good and fits that mood that they're setting with what happens with trafficking Natasha and Yelena and all the girls that become Black Widows. Like, that fits the mood. But Taskmaster, of course, it fits thematically to have it be a woman. But, like, yes, I understand I would have loved to have Taskmaster do more. I would have liked to see more of a Taskmaster in the MCU. It doesn't exactly matter if it's a man or a woman. I know that I just think they could have done more with Taskmaster as a character. Also, Dreykov is just a really, yes, again, it fits with a Black Widow movie, but also it's just a really misogynistic white dude. That, okay, the pheromone lock thing is kind of cool, but, like, I don't know. And I just wish this had come out sooner, because it's just weird to have it come out in Phase 4, and really the only reason now that we can say, okay, that makes sense, is because Yelena was being set up in this movie, and it's closure for Scarlett Johansson after Endgame, but it would have fit better for Scarlett Johansson, specifically, obviously before Endgame, before her death, before Natasha's death. But I don't hate this. It's obviously B tier, so it's still it's still good. Number 22, Ant-Man, and number 21, Ant-Man and the Wasp. I'm putting both the Ant-Mans right next to each other, and I moved them up to B tier. I had them in C tier. But I like rewatching these because they're just fun comedy family movies. Like, I think that these movies are just fun on rewatches, and Paul Rudd is extremely charismatic and great. Michael Douglas is great as Hank Pym, and you have Michelle Pfeiffer in there, Evangeline Lilly as Hope Van Dyne. The Wasp is great, specifically in the sequel, in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Of course, Michael Pena as Luis. You just can't hate that, dude. I just think, like, I love these wholesome, optimistic characters, and they had such a unique way of exposition to have him tell this story, his stories. It's just entertaining. And, you know, my parents love watching both these movies, just as fun movies. They're very family oriented. So yeah, I like the Ant-Man movies. Are they the greatest? No, they're very small scale, no pun intended, or pun intended. You can take that as you will. But they're fun. So, but I can't put them in the top 20. But I enjoy watching them, so that's why I'm putting them in good rather than meh, because I like laughing and I like enjoying things. All right, number 20, Doctor Strange. So visual effects, amazing. Just some of the best visual effects in the MCU, obviously, really showed what these can do, and I love, like, the physics of, like, the buildings melting down and bending, and it's just, everything looks awesome. Benedict Cumberbatch is amazing as this character. Tilda Swinton, despite the controversy of whitewashing the Ancient One, I think Tilda Swinton is still great as the Ancient One. Caecilius in this movie, unfortunately, is kind of one note. They used Mads Mikkelsen. I just wish they did more with him. Dormammu was cool, and having it also be Benedict Cumberbatch doing Dormammu at the very end was cool, and I've come to bargain as a very clever way to deal with the villain, and it fits for the character of Doctor Strange. So I'll put Doctor Strange as number 20. It's just like... it's just kind of also generic origin movie for the MCU. Unfortunately, it kind of goes sort of in line with the first Iron Man, of this rich, arrogant dude learns humility and how to be a better person, just in a different way of going about it. But I still enjoy it. It's still a B-tier movie. Number 19, Avengers Age of Ultron. James Spader, right off the top, great voice of Ultron. I actually prefer this over Ross Marquand, who did a good job filling in, like in What If, but no one replaces James Spader as the voice of Ultron to give a robot character some personality. I actually dislike when I'm playing like Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 and you have Ultron in the game who just is devoid of any personality, and that's fine. I guess it's a android robot, but like it's cool to have a character like the antagonist of the movie and you have a character with more personality. Yes, he acts like Tony Stark, but I don't have a problem with it because the movie wouldn't have been as interesting without James Spader, to be honest. And that's kind of why it's this low. James Spader kind of helps it, and that's kind of weird. I just feel like maybe the dialogue wasn't as great. Again, Joss Whedon, I problems with him as a person probably, but it just wasn't as fluid as the first Avengers was, in my opinion. And it's a lot of plot points. Again, a lot of it does come to fruition, so I don't hate this movie at all. It's in B tier, but it is definitely the worst of the Avengers movies, in my opinion. I just think that, unfortunately, this shows some of the drawbacks of the MCU, but I still love the interconnectivity and setting things up, but it kind of hurts this movie specifically, unfortunately. But also, obviously, they wasted Quicksilver, Aaron Taylor Johnson. I wish they didn't kill him off. Obviously, with Fox's rights, they had to. But it sucks that they wasted Quicksilver in the MCU, and technically they'll waste him again, as I'll talk about when I get to that show. But it introduced Vision and Wanda to us, so that's pretty cool. Alright, number 18, Captain America, the First Avenger. So, I love what this does with establishing who Steve Rogers is as a character. And, it does such a good job of that. I love, actually, the first half of this movie. I actually really dig that more than the second half, to be honest. Because it's showing who Steve Rogers is, and they do a really great job of setting that up. I don't have any complaints about that. It's kind of like the second half is a little to me. I don't like how they montage through World War II, and I don't think the fight with Red Skull and Steve Rogers is as good as that could have been at the very end. Obviously, we know what happens to Red Skull now, at the end of the Infinity Saga. So that's interesting. Going back to then, we had no idea what happened, whether he died or not. But it was a cool thing that they pulled from this. But it is a great start to Steve Rogers. Obviously, the other Captain America things, I think, do better with building on this character from what they established. But you can't have those without first establishing who this character is. So I think it's a good movie, for sure. Number 17, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So I moved this down a tiny bit. I think I had it like 16 before. It's at 17. I do like this, and I love what they did with Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes of developing them more. They did a great job with that. John Walker is also interesting. Wyatt Russell is great. I think he's a very interesting character. Again, not your typical antagonist. Unfortunately, we do have a typical antagonist that I just don't find that interesting in Carly Morgenthau. I think Erin Kellyman was fine. I just don't think the writing was great. I didn't really sympathize with her. I don't know if they were trying to make us sympathize with what she was doing, or just like at the end just try to make her a full-on villain. It was just confusing what they wanted to do with her, and I just don't think they pulled it off well. I do love the Isaiah Bradley stuff. I think that's great storyline, perfect storyline to put in this show, and they cap that off very, very well. And Zemo's great. Obviously, the Zemo dancing gif. Daniel Bruhl is great, and they develop that character from Civil War, and make him, again, another complex villain. I don't like what they did with Sharon Carter in this series. The power brokers, like, there was teases through it, yeah, but I was like, she can't be it. Like, I just didn't feel satisfied. I don't feel satisfied with her as the power broker. I don't know where they're taking her character at all moving forward. And just like, yeah, I can understand she was shunned from the Avengers. Nobody came to help her. But she all of a sudden is just going to turn full evil because of... I just don't really enjoy it. I just don't think it was well done, in my opinion, with her. And but I think the racial issues that they covered in this show were well covered, and so I just think that there were some good things, but then there was other half, a couple characters that they just didn't do well with, I don't think. Number 16, most recent, Eternals. I'm putting it at number 16 at the top of the B tier. This is the end of the B tier. So Eternals is a very divisive film. We said that in the podcast, Will and I, and we talked about it, and there are things I don't necessarily like, but I went into this movie, saw the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, was like, can it really be that bad? It really isn't that bad as the reviews, as the critics are saying. I've heard from other people who didn't really like it that much, said it was one of the worst. It's like, I just don't see that. I went in, I saw reviews saying it's devoid of any humor, and that just wasn't the case. You had some great humor in Eternals, and for so many characters, I don't necessarily know if some of them they pulled off perfectly at all. Some of them didn't get as much development as others. Completely agree with that. But what they did with that many characters, 10 or 11 characters, like 10 Eternal characters, is just... they at least did something right. I hate the Deviant Leader, Crow. They wasted Bill Skarsgård. I didn't even know that was Bill Skarsgård until I saw the credits and saw his name in the credits, and I'm like, wait, Bill Skarsgård was in this movie? Like, they just wasted that character, and I didn't need a mouthpiece for the Deviants. Like, I didn't want to sympathize with them. I was fine with them being mindless, nameless monsters, to be honest. I was fine with it because you already had so many other characters to develop. I think Icarus, Richard Madden, was a really interesting character. I loved Kingo. Camille Nanjiani was great. Hilarious. I know I've said I wasn't exactly a fan of his arc, what happened with him not showing up in the final battle, but after talking with Will about it and some other people online, hearing them talk about that, I understand it. I guess I've grown accustomed to the trope of everybody shows up in the final battle to battle whatever they have to fight. And so that's just what the MCU has been doing in a lot of comic book movies, or like just in general when you have stories that have people fighting the villain, you're generally going to have everybody show up. But I understand it. I think it was interesting to have Kingo take a stance. I also want to say another great wholesome side character, Karun, his valet, was great. Harish Patel, really, really wholesome, and I love that the humanity he brought, and like a human character's point of view of the Eternals was really, really cool to see. It is interesting that now we have this giant Eternal celestial head of Tiamat poking his head and hand, like poking out of the ocean. That is really interesting. Yeah, and I mean, it's just, and then Arsham the judge, like, the scale. Like, the cinematography, I also want to say, Chloe Zhao did a great job. I really don't understand how people can think this is the worst film when this is some of the best cinematography in the MCU. And the way they made Arsham, like, scale and size, they could have screwed that up, and they didn't. That's intimidating. And having him, like, take Cersei and Kingo and Phastos and being like, I may return for judgment. Like, that's terrifying. That they pulled off well. And the post-credit scenes, of course, we have Harry Styles in the MCU as Thanos' brother. Patton Oswalt's voicing Pip the Troll, which was interesting. And, of course, Dane Whitman. Kit Harington is awesome. And Dane Whitman, I really liked his chemistry with Cersei. and excited to see him as the Black Knight with Mahershala Ali as Blade. I didn't know who the voice was. I know I'm rambling. But I didn't know who the voice was originally. Then I looked it up, and Chloe Zhao confirmed it was Mahershala Ali Blade. And I'm excited to see where that goes. There's a lot in this movie. That's why I spent a lot of time talking about this, because there's so much there. So much. But I really don't like how it's been called the worst thing in the MCU, because it definitely is not, in my opinion. If it is in your opinion, tell me why, but I struggle to see how this is the worst thing the MCU has ever done. I enjoyed it. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did, and I don't think it's the best thing the MCU has done, but I don't think it's the worst at all. A tier. This is the great stuff. There's some flaws for sure, and we'll talk about those. But overall, it's pretty great. We're at the halfway mark. 15, WandaVision. So, watching the show and doing the podcast with Josh and Gabe on WandaVision, I enjoyed theorizing so much. There was so much speculation online, and with us specifically, on what was happening in this show from week to week. I also love what they did with Wanda and Vision, again, developing these characters. And they did a great job with it. I don't know that the speculation really helped, and I don't know that they planted so many seeds for things, and then not all of them panned out. I don't necessarily think that they did this extremely perfectly, but they did focus on the two characters that they had their show off of. Of course, the sitcom stuff was done to a T. I have no complaints about that. We knew this was all about sitcoms going in, and they pulled that off for each era that they did. Kathryn Hahn as Agatha Harkness. Yes, the villain, the character herself, motivations might be not as fleshed out as they can be, but now we got the Agatha Harkness show coming out to do that, and Kathryn Hahn as a performer is like, her is Agatha, like, throughout the whole show, just performing and having a good time, I think worked enough that it really helped carry the character and made her interesting, and she was a lot of fun to watch as well. And of course, Monica Rambeau got set up more with her powers. I'm interested in her character, Jimmy Woo, the King, another great wholesome character that we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Forgot to mention him there, but I'll mention him now. Jimmy Woo was great. Darcy was also made more likable. She wasn't as great in the first two Thors as much, but here she was made better. Although, unfortunately, the pandemic made it so we couldn't finish her character, as Kat Dennings couldn't show up to film her last scenes. And then we have the Ralph Boner of it all. The Evan Peters cameo was amazing. Like, it was leaked, but like, just seeing him show up to be Quicksilver. Well, what we thought was Quicksilver. From the X-Men universe, and just like they teased us so much with that, and they knew, I guess, what they were going for when what they wanted to do, but I just don't think making him Ralph Boner and then just him being gone for the rest of the episode after that was really, like, the rest of the finale. Like, the finale was a little bit disappointing, but they did conclude Wanda and Vision's arcs for that show, so I can't say it's the worst thing by any means. But there was just disappointment. Reed Richards not showing up after, like, Tiana Paris, Monica Rambeau's actress, was like, oh yeah, this astrophysicist, you're going to be excited once you know who it is. And it's like, oh, it was nobody. And we thought it was Reed Richards, which is a bit ridiculous to think that, but also maybe don't have your actors say, like, oh, I can't wait for, who you're going to see this as. Also, Tyler Hayward is another generic villain. There was some intrigue there with what he was saying earlier on, but then he just turned into a generic villain who wanted to shoot children. So it just, they could have done better. And the theory that he was actually Ultron in disguise, thanks Josh, I thought that was really, really interesting, and they could have done that. But, that theory was really fun. Theorizing was fun, like I said. Number 14. The original Iron Man, the OG, the one that started this all, they kicked the MCU off so well. I feel like with Iron Man, it's like, this movie was very, very good. Like, it's a great start to the MCU. Back when I just think this first movie, they didn't know exactly what was going to happen. They didn't know if this was going to work. But it did. Jon Favreau did a fantastic job with this one. I know studio interference, unfortunately, kind of ruined Iron Man 2. But this worked. I really think that Iron Man is just great. I just think the stuff that's come out after it, some of the stuff that's come out after it has just blown everyone away, really. I mean, it just... But really, they really found a way to kick this off. Robert Downey Jr., again, I want to say he's the perfect Tony Stark. And I mean, just like they took such a big risk with getting Robert Downey Jr. after his past being a criminal, or, his past with drugs and addiction. But just they took a risk and it paid off and helped Robert Downey Jr.'s life out to help him be a better person. Iron Man is just great, but I just don't, it's a great start, but I like more movies that came out after, but they did a great job with this being the first installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Number 13, Spider-Man Homecoming. So, Homecoming is they skipped the origin story, and now we know we're getting an animated show about that because fans complained. But Homecoming, I thought was just refreshing that we didn't need to see Uncle Ben die again. Yes, he's a huge part of Peter Parker's life in the comics, and but I just think it was refreshing to see this. I don't agree with the Iron Boy Jr. criticisms. Iron Man's in it for 10 minutes, and this is a new story. This is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We haven't seen him in this large a scale, being able to interact with the Avengers, and I think that was really, really cool. Tom Holland is my favorite portrayal by far, and of the 3 live-action Spider-Men, and I think Homecoming just nailed some things. I think they nailed the high school feel that they were going for. Vulture, Michael Keaton is great as the Vulture. Very understandable motivations. I do get some of the criticisms of it. I like some of the scene. I love the scene where, come on, Spider-Man, and lifting the rubble and choosing not to take the Iron Spider at first. That, and refusing to be an Avenger at first. I think that stuff is great. I don't know. I feel like the action wasn't as satisfying to me. I don't know why. I think what I got from Spider-Man action was what happened in Far From Home, and I think they just improved so much on some of the complaints people had with this movie. I never criticized this movie as much. I like Homecoming a lot, but they improved everything that I wanted to see them continue to grow Peter Parker in the MCU with Far From Home, and I think it's amazing to see. But Homecoming established, again, you have to establish these characters and then grow them, and Homecoming did a really good job for Peter Parker in the MCU. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is number 12. I like the first one better than the second one, but the second one did some great things. I know on the podcast specifically, and I know a lot of people that just don't like where they took some of the characters. And I can agree, Drax is not that great, especially because he's being super misogynistic through the entire movie, specifically to Mantis. Drax is not great in this movie. I don't really care for Mantis either. She's not bad, I just don't... She's kind of a dumb, dull character a little bit. I just don't exactly like her too much. Don't care for her, sorry. But Star-Lord's my favorite character in the MCU. I think Chris Pratt, again, is great. I think his emotion with, I read that this actually helped him with with the death of his own father. I think Kurt Russell as Ego is amazing. I love Yondu's arc in this movie. I love where they took Yondu, Nebula, and Gamora becoming sisters, and they're reconciling their past differences was great. Rocket is interesting, even though he's a jerk through most of the movie. I don't like what they did with the Sovereign. Sovereign are also just stupid. Taserface is stupid. Like, some of the plot lines I totally get. Some of the plot lines don't exactly work. Baby Groot's fine. I like Adult Groot better as well. Because I feel like Baby Groot, unfortunately, you're not going to have as much heart in Baby Groot as you do with Adult Groot. And so, yeah, I mean, Guardians 2 is better than people think, but I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I still have it in A tier because I love the Guardians, I love Star-Lord, and I like where they took specifically Peter Quill in his emotions and dealing with his father troubles. I think that's a natural path to go to after the first one. They just didn't nail all the characters. Also, having actors like Sylvester Stallone in the MCU now is awesome. So, yeah. No, I mean, and teasing Adam Warlock now with Will Poulter now being cast. Like, I'm excited to see that. So, it's going to be cool. Number 11, Loki, Season 1. So, I moved Loki down originally when it first finished airing. I put it in S tier. I thought it was great for what it teased. After talking to Will specifically, I understand the criticisms and the fact that maybe this show, compared to Falcon and Winter Soldier and WandaVision, doesn't quite close out Loki's arc. Unfortunately, those two shows don't have second seasons. They have stuff furthering Sam and Bucky and Wanda, Wanda and Sam specifically, furthering their character arcs moving forward into films. And this obviously is a season 2, so they kind of more so left it open for season 2 and didn't quite close Loki's arc through this first season. I totally get that. It's just very, very cool with this, TVA, the Time Variance Authority, and just, Josh and Gabe and I talked about, okay, are they going to tease Kang the Conqueror? Because, we saw with WandaVision, they were teasing some things that didn't quite pan out, and we thought that they would go into multiverse stuff, especially with the Evan Peters thing, and they didn't quite do that, obviously, as I talked about, but Loki paid that off with us theorizing about is Kang the Conqueror going to show up. And as soon as the finale, as soon as the elevator opens and it's Jonathan Majors and we knew he was cast as Kang the Conqueror, and this is a variant of him, He Who Remains, I thought that was awesome. I know that finale is all about exposition, but it's interesting to me. I think Jonathan Majors playing an aloof version of Kang the Conqueror of He Who Remains is really, really fun, and just teasing what's to come for the MCU in Phase 4 with Kang the Conqueror, and I thought that was cool. And also we get Richard E. Grant cameoing as, guest starring as classic Loki. Getting all these variants of Loki were cool. Sylvie was alright. I know people are not a fan of the kiss at the end. One thing, self-cest does not exist because you cannot have a sexual relationship with yourself. Just to point that out. But it just, I didn't hate it. Sylvie was alright to me. I was more interested in the TVA. Also, Owen Wilson as Mobius. Owen Wilson is awesome. Loved him as Mobius, even though he didn't say wow, but I think that was cool to kind of break the mold that Owen Wilson usually does, but then have other stuff that Owen Wilson brings, such as the charisma and the snarkiness, and I just think that they really, Owen Wilson worked well, and I'm excited to see more Mobius in the MCU, and Tom Hiddleston's always great, and always a delight to have. All right. Number 10, Avengers. I don't know why I had Avengers like down a few spots. Like I had it outside of the top 10, and then I was like, well, why is Avengers not in the top 10? And then I'm like, okay, I need to think about this. That third act is too spectacular. I don't. It's crazy. Like this is the first time really we saw how the MCU could work. Really, this is like we had these solo movies building up to this 5 previous movies, and then this is like how we see those 5 movies come together for the first time. And I think it just worked. I know I talked about how Joss Whedon. I think at least for the first Avengers, I think the writing was pretty spot on. I think the first 2 acts are a little bit slower, maybe, and and I don't know necessarily if all the characters completely get good arcs. Specifically, Hawkeye does not get a great arc in this movie at all. He's brainwashed for half of it. Jeremy Renner didn't really even want to be Hawkeye anymore after just being a cameo in Thor, and after this movie, if he didn't get like an arc. Obviously, we saw how that turned out. But, Avengers is fine. Avengers is really good, actually. But it's, great. But I think that third act is what everybody talks about. And I know we'll talk about that with, later Avengers movies, of course. But they top this third act of the first Avengers later on, of course. But it was good for the time. And, it's a big tease of what came after, and hopefully what's to come, how crazy it will get later on. We're almost an hour into this. End of the A tier, Thor Ragnarok. For me, Thor Ragnarok is the best of the Thor movies. It's a very enjoyable movie. The reason it's not an S tier is because the comedy sucks out a little bit of the emotional stakes, because there's a joke dropped basically after something sad happens every single time, which I wish for Taika Waititi. I think if you've seen Jojo Rabbit had great comedy, but then it had some of the heavier stuff that didn't get offset by a joke. I just don't know. I know a lot of the script actually was improv from what I read. Hemsworth did a lot of improv with Taika Waititi, and so a lot of the comedy is improv. I don't know whether quite a bit of it does work actually, because it's really entertaining. But there are stuff that is offset by a joke. Cate Blanchett as Hela is great. She's a badass. She's a tiny bit one-dimensional, but it's fine because she's a badass, and she works well within this movie. I still ranked her highly, and those of us on that podcast did rank her as one of the top villains for sure. She absolutely deserves that. But she she does have a little bit of motivation. It's just not as clear cut maybe as Thanos's. But it works. And Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster it's Jeff Goldblum being Jeff Goldblum. I get if you aren't a fan of that, but I think it just works. And Taika Waititi as Korg is great. Loki's still pretty good. So Thor Ragnarok is still good in quite a bit. Also, Taika really doing things like killing off the Warriors 3 without much fanfare. Thor just lost his other friends, and just nothing. He doesn't even react to that. So again, there's stuff that they could have done better, which is why Thor Ragnarok is the top of the A tier and not an S tier. All right, best of the best. Let's close this out after about an hour of this. Yeah, it's nuts. Number 8, I have Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I think The Winter Soldier is very, very good for how it built on Captain America and made him even cooler. And the action is superb. really amazing, and the emotional stakes with between Steve Rogers and Bucky. I know this is Will's favorite MCU project or movie. And it's a really entertaining ride. It deserves to be an S tier. It's just not my favorite. I don't have anything against it, but it's not my favorite political thriller. It's also the first movie that the Russo brothers made, and they did a good job. Obviously, all the Russo brother movies are in the top tier. And Robert Redford as the villain is really, really cool. Mental threat in the MCU, and I like when they do more mental villains than, more cerebral villains than they do a bunch of physical threats. Number 7, Captain America Civil War. Airport battle, especially. But, like, they introduced Black Panther and Spider-Man in the same movie and still found time to do a little bit for both of them and Iron Man and Captain America. It is still centered on Steve Rogers, but just the way that the Russo brothers are just able to balance a lot of these characters is crazy. And, like, I know it's maybe not people's favorite to have the Avengers fighting each other rather than working together as a team. I get that, but like that airport battle is great. I actually like that more than the final conflict between Tony and Steve. Maybe that's a hot take. I don't hate that. I think it's still good and it's still emotional, but like I like and intense, but I like that airport battle because it's fun and like there's still a lot of like quippy dialogue and it just, I don't know, it work. The interactions work. And we get to see Spider-Man and Black Panther in action. So, and, you know, Zemo, you know, he didn't necessarily need to be in the movie, but, you know, I like the mental threats, like I said. All right, number 6, this might be a hot take, I don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy. I know the podcast didn't rank the Guardians movies super high. I think it's a crime to have the first Guardians of the Galaxy specifically as low as it was. They took literal unknown characters and just propelled them to stardom. People love these characters. Like, I love Star-Lord. I think Chris Pratt is perfect as the lovable idiot goofball. Like, they took Andy Dwyer and literally just made him a superhero, and that's cool to me. And I just, Chris Pratt's one of my favorite actors because he just makes a character very, very likable while also being an idiot. And you know, this team of 5, this main team of 5 is like, they get their moments, and Drax isn't as insufferable or annoying as he is in 2. His humor is actually fine. Ronan the Accuser is not the best villain, but I know that Will was a bigger fan of Ronan than he was the rest of the Guardians. You know, Lee Pace was great as a great choice for Ronan the Accuser. I think that I wish that they had developed Ronan better, but I think the stuff that they did give Ronan was actually kind of cool. His beef with Xandar could have been developed much more, I agree. But the fact that he's able to stand up to Thanos is crazy, man. I actually like the dance-off at the end. Dance-off, bro. I actually like that. I know when we said on the podcast that should have been better, but it's the Guardians. I mean, they're idiots, and I love that that's a part of it, and it's just something different than what we're used to, and it is Marvel's version of Star Wars. It's a space opera, a space comedy. Like, I just think there's so much that worked. There's heart to it. The music is great. I actually prefer the music. I wanted to mention the music. The soundtrack in this one I like better than the second one. The second one has some great music too, but I love Come Get Your Love, Hooked on a Feeling, Want You Back, Ooh Child, like, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Like, I just think there's some real bangers in this soundtrack. And the whole story with Peter Quill and his mom is very, very good. And I just, like, they just did such a good job with this movie of establishing these characters and establishing unknowns. And adult Groot is better than baby Groot, teenage Groot, in my opinion. Also was cool. Benicio del Toro as the Collector was interesting. And we got a Howard the Duck cameo for the first time in the MCU, which was cool. All right, we're almost done. Top 5, baby. Spider-Man Far From Home is my number 5. I know that the Edith glasses are a little bit clunky in this movie. They're kind of just a MacGuffin thing that they needed to put in. But I love what the story is about, and I love Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. I think that he brings so much bravado to this character, and again, my favorite, like, just mental, cerebral threat to Spider-Man. And the illusion sequence is fantastic. Even just the scene, the Mysterio reveal, like, again, that bravado and charisma that Jake Gyllenhaal has, and his ability to still come off as psychotic at the same time. Like, I just think it works. They pulled off a dude with the fishbowl on his head being really compelling and interesting and fun to watch. And just Spider-Man's Spidey sense. Like, I just think that was the coolest use of the Peter Tingle or the Spidey sense. And just the way it ended, setting up No Way Home with, just made me want to watch No Way Home immediately after seeing Far From Home for the first time. J.K. Simmons returning as J. Jonah Jameson to help Mysterio out Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Like, I'm excited for No Way Home, and I'm just ready for that experience that could potentially be like Endgame. And you can't have that without the great setup that Far From Home provided, in my opinion. Also, the Skrull twist of Nick Fury and Maria Hill being Skrulls throughout the movie is cool. Some of the dialogue, like, if you're rewatching it, you can actually notice that they are Skrulls. So I think some of the writing needs more attention for how good some of it is. I do think the first half of the movie is not as good as the second half, but I think it works. I really think it works, and I like Zendaya and Tom Holland together. Of course, they're an actual couple in real life, so her as MJ with Tom Holland Peter Parker is I think is the best relationship. It's between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, Gwen Stacy. It's between those two relationships, but I think Tom Holland and Zendaya together, plus their better writing in these movies than in the Amazing Spider-Man duology, is better. So, number 4, I have Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I just actually rewatched that recently to finish my rewatch of everything except Eternals, because I'm not going back to the theater at the moment. Shang-Chi is great. I really love Shang-Chi. Simu Liu is great. Him and Awkwafina together is pretty good as Katie. Shang-Chi and Katie are really good together. I think that Wenwu, the real Mandarin, Tony Leung, is great. A really complex character. Yes, he wants this power and greed, but he has this, this family that brought out the best of him as a person, but and he just wants, like, what made him a better person, and it kills him. But, like, I just think that performance was great. I thought the choreography was amazing. I love that this is an mostly Asian cast that just works, and I know people that I went with maybe weren't as into Shang-Chi as I was, but I don't know. Again, another virtually unknown character just was made good, and I'm excited to see where Shang-Chi moves forward in the MCU. I think Simu Liu is just perfect, and I want to see where he goes moving forward. Number 3, Black Panther, the best solo film in my opinion in the MCU, and Chadwick Boseman, just perfect. It sucks that we won't get him in the sequel. I just think that I don't think the sequel is going to top this first Black Panther. the cultural impact that this had. Just performances are great. The story is great. I think that the story really, really lands, and mixed with the culture, the black culture that this film shows, Ryan Coogler did a great job. Michael B. Jordan is Killmonger, such a complex character, and I know there's people like, oh, well, is he necessarily a great villain or just a well-written character? For me, they're one and the same. I don't, like, his motivations are so understandable, but, like, you understand why they're wrong, too. Like, he's going out it the wrong way. But the fact that the antagonist convinces the protagonist to like, kind of go their way, but, like, in a much better way of doing it. Like, T'Challa literally opens up Wakanda's borders and helps the world because it's he learns that Wakanda needs to use their resources to help the rest of the world in a peaceful way, and that they can't build barriers. They have to build bridges, and I just think that that's really, really cool for T'Challa as a character to go on that journey to learn from the antagonist. And Andy Serkis as Claw is great too, and just the rest of the supporting cast, Lupita Nyong'o, Denai Guerrera, like some of the Angela Bassett as Queen Ramonda. I mean, this is a great cast. And as much as Letitia Wright maybe is not, much as the controversy is behind her, I think she had a great relationship with Chadwick. And Winston Duke as M'Baku is great too. I really like this cast. I really like the story. I know the CGI in the final act maybe isn't as good as it could have been at all, but the story is so good that I'm able to look past it. I don't think it's as bad as if you're just watching it in motion compared to if, you're pausing it and trying to point out how bad. I just think people need to not try to pause movies to look at how much not as great CGI is there, because it's meant to be viewed in motion rather than pausing a movie just to nitpick. So that's my opinion on that. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War. So the fact that they made the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige, like the fact that they made 60 characters all at least have something to do in a movie. Maybe some didn't get as much as others, but oh my god, they made 60 characters in this fast-paced first part of the end of the Infinity Saga. Like, they just made that work somehow, and still this movie is centered around Thanos, and Josh Brolin was perfect as Thanos. They made this giant purple CGI character memorable and, like, understandable. His motivations are very, very clear. He's a very calculating, very big threat to the Avengers. Literally, the villain wins at the end of the Infinity War by snapping half of all life to dust, and half of our heroes are gone at the end of the movie. And I just remember at the end of this movie in the theater, like, it was silent and people couldn't believe it. And I just remember going on rewatches, and a lady literally started bawling as soon as Groot started turning to dust. So, and then as Spider-Man turned to dust, like, she was bawling really hard. So that was really interesting. I couldn't believe it, certainly, on my first viewing. And just, they did Thanos so perfectly, as he views himself as the protagonist, and he's framed as the protagonist from the movie's standpoint, that, he believes so strongly that what he's doing is right, even when it is not. But, like, they just did it so perfectly. And I know my parents have said, like, are they ever going to top Thanos? And it's just like I don't know. I mean, it looks like they're setting up some new villains, but I just think they just did such a great job with Thanos as a character and as a villain, and I just think that it's going to be very hard to top what they did here in the Infinity Saga. Number 1, though, I have to go Avengers Endgame. Yes, Infinity War might be more quickly paced, but the fact, like, Endgame slows down for a reason, because we just had half of the characters die, of course, and the world's dealing with all this death, and what just happened. Like, of course, it's going to be slowed down. I love some of these intimate moments, like with Ant-Man and his daughter Cassie. Like, Paul Rudd is great in that scene, hugging his daughter who is aged 5 years. Like, that's great. And the comedy here is like, the quips in both these movies are pretty good, and just like Endgame, just like the payoff though of this third act, this final battle, it really feels like this grand finale of 21 previous movies. It really lands, and that's crazy to think about. I know the criticism, and I do understand it. Like, Will has brought up Hulk and Thor. I totally get that, as disappointing as that is. The good news is that this isn't the end for them, because they're still coming up. There's still Thor Love and Thunder and She-Hulk to really conclude those characters. Endgame was really to conclude Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, Iron Man, and Chris Evans as Steve Rogers, Captain America. This is to conclude their storylines in the MCU, and Scarlett Johansson, Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. Obviously, we had Black Widow really have her sacrifice mean something, but you had the end of her as well in this movie. Like, they did such a good job with, closing the arcs of half of the Avengers, of the original Avengers, and, focusing on them to bring everybody back. I think it really worked. And yes, Thanos isn't as great in this one as he is in Infinity War, but I think it's a valid follow-up, and still how Thanos really believes that he is right, even if, he's going to go about it a drastically new way, but, like, he's not changing his tune in that, believing so relentlessly that he is correct, and, like, whatever he do will help humanity. Like, just this finale just did so much right and closed out these character arcs that we had been following for 10 years, and or for my case, because I didn't start watching live in the MCU. I started watching midway through phase 3 here, and then went back and watched everything, obviously. But they just did so much right with closing out this chapter of the MCU, like this story, this first book of the Infinity Saga. And of course, Far From Home is like the epilogue, but really Endgame was the perfect conclusion to this storytelling. And maybe Thor and Hulk weren't done perfectly at all, but I think they did what they had their purposes, and this is really a 2-part event, and they did a great job. So that's my takes. It's been over an hour of this MCU rankings. Didn't expect it to be this long, but hopefully you guys are going to enjoy listening to me talk about this for an hour, or watching. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time, either on Tribe of Nerds or wherever. But yeah, MCU 30 down to 1 in my opinion. Thanks.